Hello and welcome to another episode of But Have You Heard About? I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined again by my wonderful friend, Anne-Marie.
Hi.
So we are so excited today because we have what I would consider to be a fun and doozy-esque style topic to talk about. It's so exciting. We're going to talk about mourning in the Victorian era because basically we didn't really have what you would consider to be these traditions of what you do when someone dies up until the Victorian era, because literally someone dies, you bury them, you go to work the next day, you just continue on with your life. However, Queen Victoria kind of made it a tradition to mourn. She also made a lot of traditions. So if you don't know much about Queen Victoria, she's a badass bitch. Honestly, maybe not much of a badass bitch, personally. However, her things that she did or the things that the British Empire did during her reign carry through and impacted the world completely. There are multiple cultural references to her and her wonderful husband, Prince Albert. So if you don't know much about Queen Victoria, she is British. She was the Queen of Victoria. She was the Queen of England for 64 years. Up until our current monarch of England, she was the longest living ruler. So when Queen Elizabeth II finally passes away, she will have surpassed Victoria. During Victoria's reign, there really wasn't too many wars going on. And we have the Industrial Revolution, which brought a lot of manufacturing of things, as well as a bolstering of the middle class, which we really only had peasants and noble people up until then. And since we didn't really have wars, you have people that are able to stay, and the United Kingdom is growing and growing under her. And one of the ways it's growing is that there was the phrase of the sun never set on Queen Victoria's England, which is literally true. She was, whatever those fancy titles are. Look, I watch The Crown and I know there's fancy titles, but I don't know what they are. And we're just going to pretend I said them. Or you can go watch The Crown. It's a lovely show. So you have Australia, you have India, you have a few countries in Africa at the time. You have Canada, and you also have like the Falkland Islands, and I believe there was a country in South America. And then there were, possibly, you're making a face, so I'm probably wrong. But
You may be right.
There were also islands over towards Asia. And they kind of had a huge grip on China because imperialism is awesome. Also, imperialism is not awesome. It's just something I enjoy talking about. Kind of like how people like to talk about true crime. It's not that you like true crime, like you don't want to watch people get murdered, but you like to talk about it because it's just so fascinating.
Super fascinating.
So imperialism to me is like true crime for the stereotypical white woman in her 30s.
Me.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of these other traditions that are holiday-esque traditions. This is not a Christmas episode or a holiday episode, but a lot of traditions, again, started in the Victorian era. One of them is the wedding dress and having a white wedding dress. Some of the other ones, Christmas trees. So, like I said, you have Prince Albert. He's German. They had trees that they put up around Christmas with ornaments. He brought that over, made it, a very wonderful, family, warm environment.
Yeah, it used to be primarily a German thing. He brought it with him.
Like his piercing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, you have Christmas cards. So in 1843, you have Henry Cole, who published the first Victorian era Christmas card. It was very expensive. Only a few people could have it. However, children made their own cards going on after that. And they would also have some eerie cards, but with the manufacturer of color printing, as well as just making it a faster printing thing so it wasn't as expensive. In 1880, there were 11.5 million Christmas cards. So some of the eerie ones had like clowns chasing people, and then they had like large hornets that chased children. Lovely ideas.
Oh, yeah.
The next one is the Christmas crackers. Anne-Marie knew what that was. I had no idea what a Christmas cracker was, but that's all because you watch Doctor Who.
I watch a lot of Doctor Who. Primarily the 10th, 11th Doctor, Matt Smith. There's an episode, they pop the cracker, you get a little crown, little stuff in it. It's kind of fun. You can actually still find them today at like your local Target during Christmas. Just saying.
Hopefully Target pays me for that little. But they were invented around the 1840s by Tom Smith, who was inspired by bonbons when he had them in Paris. And again, they're like a tube that's wrapped and is filled with small gifts and items. Again, we had the manufacturing going on, Industrial Revolution. So you have the ability to have like toys just rapidly built so they could be put into Christmas crackers too.
Mass produced.
So by, 1860, 20 years later, it becomes a staple for not only children, but for some adults as well, because it's a fun thing. And then also you have the tradition of holiday food. So the things that we associate with, Christmas time and, carolers and giving things to carolers came out of the Victorian era. All right. Now that we're done with all of the fun, happy stuff, let's get into what I would consider the exciting parts of traditions, which is when people cry and wear black.
Yes.
Just like at concerts. When we think of Queen Victoria, I don't think that we necessarily think of her mourning phase specifically. Unless you know this off the top of your head because, I don't know, you're British or some shit. She lost two very important people to her in the same year, in less than a year. First with her was her mother in March of 1861. But then later in the year, in December of that same year, she lost Albert, whom she loved. And, he was only 42. She was madly in love with him. And when that happened, she went into mourning because she was mourning the death of her loved one. She didn't have to work for money, so she had the ability. Mm-hmm. However, the rest of the noble class, or the nobility in England, sees her mourning. And they basically have to come up with their whole, well, shit, if the queen's doing it, I gotta fucking do it too.
Yeah, because she wore black until her death. She was just in a constant state of mourning. So when you ever see any, photographs and pictures of her, she's in head to toe black.
Yep. Anyone who wound up being presented during court during the time that she was in mourning had to wear all black with all black jewelry. Mm-hmm. And her maids in waiting, while they were older and stuff, were like, we've already seen death, but shit, I guess I gotta wear black forever. Mm-hmm. And as a noble person, you would have the mourning attire so you knew how long to wear it. And then you brought up earlier about the etiquette book.
Right. There was actually etiquette books at the time that showed you how to properly mourn. And they had the mourning fashions of the time.
And not even just the fashions, but it would also tell you how long are you supposed to be in mourning.
Mm-hmm. So there was different time periods depending on who it was that died.
Yeah, and it was kind of a court fashion. And then eventually it trickled down until, through all the rest of the classes, until it was a societal expectation.
Yeah, it kind of death in general became romanticized at the time.
Yes, that's a great point. And you have different styles of mourning. You have full mourning, which is usually what women would go through for longer periods of time when it's your husband. But you would have lesser style mournings when it was a cousin. But the thing is that through the etiquette book, as a woman, you had to be in mourning for so long, even though you really didn't have feelings for someone. Mm-hmm. One of the things to point out that I always think is fun, because I love Downton Abbey. I like that I used to call it Downtown Abbey because I'm dumb.
I think everybody did at one point.
Right? But anyway, so on Downton, at the very beginning, sinking of the Titanic, she's like, how long do I have to be in mourning? And that just struck me because I'm also like, same girl, same. How long I gotta be in mourning for someone?
For real.
She wasn't even really in love with him. So
she wasn't. It was her cousin?
Yeah. Second cousin, right?
Second cousin, yeah.
Little incesty, but whatever.
Yeah, well, he was the heir to the family. Yeah. So she was, of course, expected to marry him.
Just the kind of talking about death or whatever, the average life expectancy for a Victorian adult was 45 to 50. But previously, in the Georgian or the Stuart era, you weren't living to 40.
No.
You were living to 35, especially if you're a peasant. Literally as a woman, your job is to pop out kids. And when your spouse died for whatever reason, your husband passed away, if you were of childbearing age and could have children, your basic job was to find another provider for your children that you either had, or to be somebody's got to provide for my ass. Mm-hmm. Because the only things that you really could do is that if you came from the nobility, I talked about Florence Nightingale before, you had to go through training though to be a nurse. So you could have been like Florence in the 1860s. Well, that's actually Victorian era, so not even really a nurse. You could have been a school teacher, but also that was mostly men too. So as a woman, you're stuck.
Yeah.
So you're at the, whims of men.
Yeah. Before, widows were they were pitied and everybody was oh, she lost her husband. Oh, sorry. And here, not so much. They started going through the traditions and everything. Whereas men, the mourning period for men was supposed to, if you lost your wife, was supposed to be about a year. But they really didn't expect you to go through it that whole time because they expected you to keep on providing for your family. So, you could go get married, okay, it's been a week. On you go.
With their etiquette, you had to wait longer than that. You had to go through stages too. So
yeah. Oh yeah. There was all kinds of stages. It just depends on what it was. Like I said, generally men, they expected you to mourn for about a year. Women, if you lost your husband, it was about 2 years. And there was a process to go from, the day your husband died to you're no longer mourning. If you lost your child, 6 months to a year, sibling, about 6 months, parents, 6 to 12 weeks, a friend, if you lost a friend, you could mourn. You would mourn for 3 weeks. But if somebody died who you were close to, there was a mourning period for that.
And you were expected to mourn. And if you didn't mourn, it's basically you didn't respect them. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about basically you have to buy a whole new wardrobe for mourning too.
Oh yeah.
Because, this is not just something that lasted for a year. This went on for about 20 years. Queen Victoria died in 1901.
Right.
And by that time, a lot of the mourning traditions had kind of phased out, but they were really popular during, 1861 by the end of Albert, when Albert passed away, to about 1880.
Right.
And what happens at the turn of the 20th century? World War I.
Yeah.
And there's no way you can mourn
No, there
when
was
everyone's
too many
passing.
people, yeah.
I mean, those traditions that started in the beginning of the 1860s, we have a civil war going on in the U.S. There is no way because everybody lost someone.
Mm-hmm.
They lost at least a family member, if not an immediate family member in the U.S. And, just the attitude of death, I think, changed immensely from the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, just because we have more wars and more deaths.
Yeah.
But the trickling of those Victorian era style mournings was probably more towards after the Civil War in the U.S., I think.
Right, because when Queen Victoria died in 1901, people were kind of burned out by then. They were tired of it. So the mourning period and their traditions were starting to slowly being phased out. By 1910, they were pretty much phased out because, like you said, World War I hit, people are dying left and right. And so, so many people were dying that's when the private funerals by now were starting to be held. They were starting to become more popular, and it was more socially acceptable to just keep it small and close family.
I know this just because I've studied history during this period, but Christianity also rules a lot of what you do.
Right.
And the idea that you need to have proper Christian burials, you need to have proper Christian rites. So you need to be able to, you need a priest at your funeral.
Right.
Or a pastor, whatever you may need.
Yeah.
Also, there were rules for attending a funeral, especially with those private ones you mentioned.
Right.
And you only came to a funeral if you were invited, and you never decline an invitation to a funeral.
No.
So let's say that your immediate family member passes away. You cancel all social engagements at least for the next 24 hours, if not longer, because you got to plan that funeral. And there were expectations of who's planning that funeral as well, and who's going to carry out your last wishes. So you have more of those last wishes that we see now, with a will and testament. Mm-hmm. So you have more of that happening. I don't know if you want to talk about it later on. We can talk about it now. Is people would save up money. Right. So you would start putting money away for these funerals because you needed to have one. Right. It was expected, even if you were of the lower class. So you started day one.
Yeah.
You start working in that factory. You gotta do what you gotta do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they had stationery, all black everything. When we say all black, it's everything.
Some of the funeral things, they would have an usher that would direct you around. Reminds me more of a wedding.
Yeah. I guess now it would be, modern day would be a pallbearer. Yeah.
And the grieving family was not expected to run anything of the funeral. And I mean, for me personally, my dumbass would be oh, no, I need to run everything because I'm a control freak.
Yeah.
But during the time period, the family is not expected to, do that. And women were not really allowed or even encouraged to actively greet or notice guests until they were prompted to.
Right.
So you couldn't be oh my God, there's my best friend. I need them right now.
Yeah.
And also, there's probably people who weren't really grieving when someone died, but you have to fake it.
Yeah.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. I think one thing that they did have that I felt would have helped was they had women were, of course, head to toe black, and they wore a veil. And it's the beginning, it slowly shortened throughout time, but it would be head to toe. It was a black crepe veil. And I mean, you went out, anything you did, you left your house, you were in that for first year, and that you had to wear it head to toe. And after 6 months, then you could shorten it so you could go out. But it was incredibly unsafe. They were made out of crepe and they were dyed black. They would cause breathing problems, skin rashes. They were flammable. Yeah. Imagine that, finally getting to leave your house and accidentally catching fire. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, you have 2 full years of mourning if you're a widow. Mm-hmm. However, you could shorten it if you were young.
Right.
So we talked about, you got to find someone to provide for you. You're supposed to mourn for your husband, however long you may have been married. Shit, if you were married for a week, it sucks to be you.
Yeah.
There was just so many different ones. There was no set period overall. It was literally the relationship someone had with you. Mm-hmm. And if you transitioned too fast out of mourning or through the phases, you were looked down on, that you were just not, basically you weren't Christian.
Yeah.
Because you were trying to move on too fast from someone.
Yeah. And of course it was all geared towards women.
Yes.
Men, again, they went through mourning, but once they were married, their mourning was done. Women, after the first year, you get to transition to gray. But if, that's half mourning. But even if you were to get remarried during this time, which it was acceptable, you're still wearing gray. Even your wedding dress, gray, everything gray.
And that's just...
But you did get patterns.
Yay, patterns! Yay! Look, at least you get something fun out of it.
Oh, and you could wear jewelry and start wearing your hat again. No more veil.
Oh, how fancy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But of course, nothing too crazy. Nothing over the top. Still in mourning. cemeteries did start becoming popular during this time. Before, you would get buried in your churchyard, wherever you went, but nobody was really crazy about them because, they were small, they were crowded, and they actually did smell.
Yeah, because you had so many people dying during that time.
They started becoming popular. They would be right outside of town, and you could actually go and plan it. You could go just like, today, you go to the cemetery and you're like, this is where I want to be when I die. And they're like, all right, let's show you what's available. And you could pay in payments. And you could pick your spot. You'd be like, I want that tree right there. That was squared off and given to you, and you pay it off, and it was yours.
Well, and even if you think about it now, if you want to be buried in a cemetery, plots are expensive as hell.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, I'm cheap. I just want to be cremated.
Same.
My husband knows this. So I'm just saying that's expensive. And also, I think it's hard to sell plots nowadays compared to like 20, 30 years ago. So trying to sell plots for funerals, it's hard.
Honestly, and a lot of them are almost all filled up.
I don't think people understand, like, the planning of death. It seems so morbid to think about, but it's been such a long-term tradition.
Yeah. And during the Victorian era is when we have kind of the funeral planning business got started.
Yes.
Yeah. Embalming was started. That's when people started embalming, and you had a choice. You actually would get a kit, or you could have some professional embalmer come. But if
the fact that you could do it yourself.
They actually had a DIY embalming kit.
I mean, look, some people's Pinterest ass over here is like, I'm going to embalm my husband when he passes away.
Yeah, the early form of the funeral home started around the time. They were called mourning warehouses.
Yes, and that's where you would basically go in like a warehouse style. So if you've ever been in like Costco.
Yeah, what's a Costco?
It's a Costco style funeral home where you go, okay, I'm going to pick out the coffin here. This is the coffin I want out of all these coffins. Yeah. And then you want like, this is your dress that you're going to buy or wear, whatever you can rent.
They would have a salon, and they would have like women in like the mourning period of fashion of the time in all black and all gray. And you would sit there and be like, I want that dress and I'll take this one. And move you right along. It was like, I imagine like this conveyor belt where it's like, here's your clothing choices. Yes. And then they like wheel you off to the next one where your coffin was. Before then, like, again, like you said, mourning was only for the rich. You had to have money because, I mean, when you mourned, you mourned. Yeah.
And you had the luxury to mourn because it was when we're thinking of upper class, it's people that didn't really have to work because they were of nobility and they had their expenses paid by the peasants and the working class that were tending to their land and were paid by taxes. So I want to talk a little bit about superstitions because that was like one of the things that prompted this whole discussion with superstitions. So I just want to throw out some like superstitions that kind of came about during the Victorian era. One is that you would drape mirrors with like black crepe to prevent the dearly departed from haunting their home. Because let's be honest, I don't need no ghost. Like, when I think of, like, ghosts or stuff, when we think of, like, ghost hunters and stuff, I feel that's when they started haunting was in the 1800s. Not before then.
Yeah.
Ain't no peasant going around haunting people.
Yeah. Everything. The house, it's even the house. Head to toe. Crepe. Or top to bottom in this case.
Yeah.
Crepe. Black crepe.
But, hiding or covering the mirror so this, the spirit.
Oh, and the photos were also turned down. Because they didn't, again, the spirit.
And then the windows and mirrors were covered with the curtains, drapes and sheets until after the funeral itself.
Yeah. So you stopped the clocks. I think with the time of their death is when you would stop the clocks.
Yep. And then once the funeral was over, then you can restart them. It was considered bad luck to let the clocks continue ticking away before the funeral was over. Mm-hmm. Also, when you died in your house, the body had to be carried feet first out. Yes. And it was because it was believed that if the person left head first, they could call back to those following the body to church and beckon them to follow them to death.
Yes. And not only that, like during you would have the wake at the house, which is, what we call a living room now was the parlor. That's where they held it. And it was usually 2 to 4 days before the funeral. And somebody would stay with the body at all times just to make sure they were not dead.
Or to make sure they were dead.
I'm sorry. Just to make sure they were dead. I'm sorry.
And also body snatchers.
Yeah.
And this was like, so during the Victorian era, we have more, modern, or not more modern, but we have advances in science. Mm-hmm. But to know kind of what's going on with your body, you need to like see someone recently dead and see what they died from. So if you know that somebody died from alcohol poisoning, in a sense, you want to look at their body and see what happened to them. And so you have a lot of body snatchers in the 1800s. Yeah. So you also need someone just to kind of be there.
Yeah. They used to have like basically security at cemeteries or graveyards because there was so many people. They would pay you to bring these bodies. They didn't ask questions as long as it was a dead body. So people would go after funerals and dig the bodies up. So they had to have like these posts, these tall like towers with people in them, and they would watch the cemetery all night long to make sure.
Some fun stuff, like when somebody passed away, apparently if you had good heart, flowers could and would grow over their grave. However, if you were an evil ass bitch, not even the grass would grow.
I'm going to think about that the next time I go, like, take flowers to my dad. I'm going to look at all the graves and see which ones have...
Who doesn't even have grass? Who doesn't even have grass? If you don't, at least if you have grass, flowers could grow.
Yeah. I'm totally going to think about that next time I go.
Another thing is that, it's bad luck to wear any new items of clothing to a funeral, especially shoes.
Yeah.
Which doesn't this feel like it defeats the purpose by having these mourning warehouses and having to have mourning attire? So, like, you're not going to wear all black until you're in mourning.
A lot of the time, don't remember exactly when the mourning houses, like, warehouses became popular, but I do remember that before you could, like, easily get these special made black clothes, a lot of women would, just to save money, take their current wardrobe and dye it black.
Yep.
So that's, probably where like the new... What if your shoes don't fit you?
Exactly.
What if your shoes ended up not coming out black?
Especially if it's a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't know.
I feel like children might be the exception.
Look, it's bad luck.
Again, like when you were talking about Downton Abbey, like when they announced, like, oh, he's dead, Cora tells Lord Grantham, she's like, well, I'll get the black dresses we have and see which ones fit the girls.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do. Oh, we have a black dress. Hopefully it fits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you were to ever come upon a funeral procession, you don't want to meet it head on. You want to turn and walk in another direction. However, sucks to be you if you lived near a road that was near the cemetery, going from the church. You would hold onto a button on your attire until it passed. I remember hearing this as a kid, like whenever we would pass cemeteries, like put your feet up in the car. Have you ever heard like that superstition?
Vaguely. It sounds familiar.
Like I remember doing this like on the way to Girl Scout camp. Also, to hear 3 knocks at a door and answer to an empty doorway means that someone you know has died.
Mm-hmm.
If you dream of a birth, someone you know will die. To see an owl in the daytime would be the harbinger of death.
Cool.
These are like ridiculous superstitions that I also really enjoy. First off, how would you hear 3 knocks at a door and there would be no one there unless you have like someone doing ding dong ditch, intentionally trying to freak you out that someone you know is going to die. But whatever. And if you smell roses near you and there are no roses present, then you are going to die. Also, if you see yourself in a dream, you're going to die.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like seeing your reflection or like you see yourself or if it's more
like
of...
out of body kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm assuming if it's out of body.
I don't think so.
Because like in dreams, I see my hands, I see my feet.
Yeah.
Making motions here like I'm a puppet.
Maybe you would like see your like you said, like your actual self.
Yeah, and then one of the last superstitions is that never speak ill of the dead or they're going to come back to haunt your ass. So if I speak ill of like celebrities, will they come haunt me?
Dude, that'd be kind of cool.
Like, I just want to ask Michael Jackson some questions. Not like anything like creepy or weird. I just want to be like, how did you pull off some of those dance moves? So if I speak ill of him, will he come haunt me? And will he do those dance moves while he haunts me so I can study them up close and personal?
Get some pretty badass music dance lessons. I'd be down.
Me too.
Let's do this.
For science, gotta speak ill of Michael Jackson.
Let's do it.
So we have these superstitions around death. We've talked about, kind of what happens like during the funeral and stuff. But what happens after the funeral? We have like the introduction of like condolence cards.
Yes.
Like gone but not forgotten. Thoughts and prayers. Those types of things on cards.
Cards were usually sent within 1 week. And they were to give hope to the mourner and offer like time to spend. Like, hey, we're here if you need anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was also then expected to call upon these cards.
Yeah.
So like now, like when people like post, Facebook, when people are like, oh my God, I'm here for you. I'm like, are you really?
Yeah.
No, you ain't. Let's just be real. I would like a Victorian Era condolence card. So then I know it's real.
I promise you'll get one from me if that ever happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Whenever, like in 30 years, when Little Bit passes away, I expect condolence cards because I'm going to call everybody out when they say, hey, is there anything I can do? And be like, little like to eat pizza with me. Will you come eat the crust? Because that's what she would do.
Oh, I'll show up with the pizza.
Good. My cats will eat the pizza too. Yeah. I assume that they're going to outlive her because they're heathens. So next on, outside of we have those condolence cards, my favorite, because it's so creepy, is the photography.
Yes.
So I'm forgetting the movie with Nicole Kidman.
The Others.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm glad that I just have to say the movie with Nicole Kidman.
You know why? Because I remember when that movie came out, it was like, we had Showtime at the time. I watched that movie like 20 times. I loved every one.
But it was such a good twist.
So good.
So, spoilers. It's been out for like 20 years now. But anyways, that when she finds those photographs, the photographs of people, and they're dead people, but she doesn't realize that they're the dead people, which kind of made me go, because if you notice from Victorian photographs, like the very first photographs we have, people are a little blurry.
Yeah.
However, people, the only time they would get family photos for a lot of people was when someone died.
Right.
So,
because photography, it was becoming more readily available, but it was still expensive and it was a process. You legit had to sit there still while it processed. And so that's why, like you said, that's why if there's one person who has a great photo, chances are they're dead.
Yeah, 99.9% of the time they're the one dead. Yeah. I mean, like parents would pose with their children that passed away. So I'm pretty sure one of the photos I'm going to put on this for like whenever I share it or whatever is going to be like a dead person with live people. But you'll see that the live people are just a smidge blurry and the dead person that looks crystal clear. So like portrait mode on your phone now, you can recreate that if you really wanted to.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
I've seen, because I've gone down that rabbit hole, there's some where like they're laying, I've seen them where they're like laying in bed and they all have like their eyes closed, but like children, like they're all sleeping, but it's like, wait, which ones are dead? You can tell which ones are dead. It's really sad, but that was usually the only time they could afford to really get a photograph of the family. Yeah.
And there were also like memento photos.
Yeah.
So you have like this, death photography. And they'd be used like heirlooms. But when people started living longer and shit, they kind of fell out of fashion. Because they wouldn't be the heirlooms anymore. Because you're like, I don't need to pass on the story of my mom because she's still alive. So not as exciting.
A lot of the time it was like children because child mortality rate was so high.
Thank God people learned to wash their hands.
Yeah.
Things that we still need to learn in the 21st century. Wash your damn hands, you nasties. So something that I also think would be really cool to bring up when it comes to like the after funeral stuff, after like the photography, the literal mementos that people would get.
Yeah.
One of those being like the cameos and the silhouettes. A lot of stuff would be made in black. So again, this is definitely for like that upper middle class and the nobility. Because they would get things specially made that looked like, or they'd get like the photograph of the dead one in some jewelry, or they would have an artist like carve. I'm making hand motions again, like people can see on a podcast, but they're like chiseling.
Yeah. They were usually made out of jet, tortoise shell, and it was always some sort of like fossilized wood. So they were, they weren't cheap.
In a case that was a larger mantelpiece, they would be hung on the wall or placed in a frame on the mantle itself. Right. So your mantelpiece is supposed to be where you mourn people, apparently not put up your Christmas stockings.
It was really popular. That actually was really popular right up until like World War I. And then again, people are dying everywhere. But it actually had a resurgence in like the 1920s. People started doing it again.
The Roaring 20s.
Makes sense.
So the next piece I want to talk about, because to me, it's the creepiest one.
Yes.
The hair?
The hair. Oh,
is that the creepy one to you?
I think that one's crazy. It was actually rumored that Queen Victoria had a locket of Prince Albert's hair. So yeah. I think that's what kind of like sparked that popularity.
Yes.
Yeah, so it actually became popular at former wig makers. Like, wigs weren't as popular during the time, and so wig makers needed something else to do, and they were like, I could turn your dead loved one's hair into a piece of art, and they never went out, They just stopped making wigs and started making hair art.
Yeah, because, like everybody is a historian and that listens to this, but during the Georgian period, that's when you have those big-ass wigs.
Yes.
So, yeah. You have that falling out because Victoria, and then in like you're like the 1860s, if you have that skill set, you're like, shit, what do I do? Even though artwork made of hair, like with hair in general, has been around since the 16th century.
Yeah.
It's just so weird to me.
Yeah.
And the fact is that a person's hair was a very intimate, physical reminder of a person's existence.
Right.
And making art out of a person's hair was common for everything from courting to death. So it wasn't just death that made you want something with someone's hair. So, talking about a locket of hair, I remember like watching movies based on like time periods in like the 20th century, like mid 20th century, people would give lockets of hair when World War II, World War I, the soldiers going off to war.
Mm-hmm.
She gives a locket of her hair. She's like, I'm gonna cut my hair for you, baby. And I'm like, what are you gonna do?
There's an episode in Mad Men where the little boy is in love with Betty Draper, and he asks her for a locket of her hair, and she's just like, and she actually clips off a small couple of pieces of hair and gives it to him, and he's like over the moon. But of course, also like embalming DIY kits, they had DIY hair jewelry kits because a lot of people didn't trust these specialists because you get it back and yeah, it's the right color, but is it really your loved one? Like there was like that skepticism. So like, is this really their hair? So you could actually send away for a DIY hair jewelry kit.
Well, and the reason they wanted to make sure it was actually their loved one is because they had this, I don't want to say obsession, that's not a good word, but they had this idea that your hair was your essence.
Yeah.
So you don't want some random person's essence. You want your cousin Theodore essence because, I don't know, maybe
not some peasant Mary's essence.
Not someone who just went around like this wig, like his former wig maker is like, look, I'm just going to shave off some bitch's hair and go, brr, brr. I mean,
and
they didn't have shavers.
He messes up and he's like, oh, look at this. I just happen to have an extra weft of this color. It matches.
And I assume that happened more often than not.
Yeah.
But like you said, courting couples. So during that time, courting couples would be likely to send each other hair.
Yeah.
So Lord Byron at the time period would get so much hair.
Yes.
I mean, he was great. I've talked like minimally about him because his daughter was a genius. But
Ada Lovelace.
Yes. Look, she really is the one who'd been in the computer. Mm-hmm. And the fact that like when I was looking up stuff about Victorian stuff, just to kind of like, you're like, okay, let's get some refreshers. They brought up that guy. I can't remember his name. That's how much I approve of him. But I was like, you didn't bring up Ada?
I know.
How dare you? So I just assume Lord Byron probably like Scrooge McDuck style had a room full of hair.
Oh, I can believe it.
Just dove into it.
Speaking of the hair, they also had like dissolved work. It's where, again, professionals, they would take the hair and dissolve it and mix it with ink, and they would paint like these beautiful like pictures on ivory. And it was like super detailed.
Yes.
Yeah.
That shit looks awesome.
It does. But
also like, oh my God. I mean, the thing that's like for nobility.
Yeah.
Or for people who own the factory. It's not the foreman at the factory. It's the person who owns the factory.
Yeah. My broke ass would be over there with my DIY kit praying to God I didn't destroy it.
Right? Or you're like, oh shit, man. I hope I have enough money to buy the DIY kit and have help with the funeral cost before I die.
Right.
So just thinking about jewelry in general, for a full set of mourning jewelry, you would have like usually like a comb, a brooch, earrings, necklace. And it's not, I don't like jewelry. I mean, you're sitting across from me. I literally am wearing a plastic band for my wedding ring.
Meanwhile, I'm like decked out.
I know, but I'm like, look, comparing again, people don't see us. But the jewelry that they would have, I would consider it beyond gaudy.
Yeah, it was fashionable at the time.
It's like the Met Gala. Yeah. It's a Met Gala every day, and it is fashionable at the times. And also, just remember, we can blame everything on Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
Because she literally did all of this. Or rumors, again, that she had the locket of Albert's hair caused everybody else to be like, shit. I'm going to be just like her. But also, people loved her.
They did.
You know, it wasn't just Victoria. Like, there were traditions beforehand, but it didn't become popular and it didn't stick until her. But also, she mourned for 40 years, basically, after Albert passed.
It became romanticized.
And there was a whole generation that was born in 1860 that never saw her not wear black. If not more, technically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, when it was time to move on, you had a coming out party. I love that they have to have parties. It was like, all right, guess what? Mourning's over. Let's have a party. You're going to come on back out into society.
I mean, it's literally just kind of like a reemerge. It's almost like a phoenix thing.
Yeah.
So you have, especially for women, you've been so long mourning or whatever you may have you, especially if it was, you know, someone close, like a sibling, especially if you're young, you're like, shit. I'm ready. Look, I'm ready to mingle. Yeah. I don't want a black or a gray wedding dress. I'm ready to get the white. I want to be like Victoria, but not in that sense with the mourning. So let's get it going.
Because I had 2 years to mourn for a woman who lost her husband. It's a long time. I'd be planning that party.
Look, yeah, me too.
Single and ready to mingle.
Well, I think that we've talked about a lot when it comes to Victorian mourning. And I think a lot, I mean, this energizes me because it's so different, but it's the type of stuff from history that I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting.
Yeah, this is honestly like some of my favorite, like that weird, like obscure kind of history is like my thing. That's right up my alley.
And it's also not like cringy history. I mean, first off, getting like a brooch or like a clasp for your head. What is that called? Barrette with hair. So hair on hair is kind of weird and cringy, but it's not like, it doesn't make me feel bad about myself type history, because I like to talk about that stuff.
It's like, today we have the funeral home. We plan all this out. Most of us still wear black. We go through these things. I'm Hispanic. So, we do have people come together. We mourn. We still have similar traditions, of course, not as in depth, but it's interesting to find out where they originated from.
Yeah. And most traditions, I talked about the beginning, you have the empire where the sun never sets, and you have these British men that went out and they brought back traditions from these indigenous people of other, continents.
Yeah.
And it kind of meshed together too. Because, the first casket, the oldest caskets ever found is from China.
Yeah.
Imperialism is really fun, and traditions to me are fun. I had talked before about sports, because the tradition of sport originated in imperialism, which again is Victorian era stuff. Imperialism is more about colonialism and kind of went on longer and took up more speed during the 1800s, because you had less fighting of wars amongst Europeans and more suppressing of other cultures outside that didn't necessarily have the guns to fight off the cannons. And and I'm just kind of like, that's cool. Yes. Well, Anne-Marie, is there anything else you want to mention about?
No, I love, this is my history kind of thing. It's hey, you want to know why we started doing that? Let me tell you.
It's always fun to because I think people forget that we don't do things just on a whim.
Right.
Through time, and as humans, we usually mimic. And obviously that's where traditions come from.
Yeah. They started somewhere, and this is how they started.
Even the morbid ones. Well, again, my name is Courtney. You've been listening to But Have You Heard About? And I'm joined again by Anna Marie. And we hope you guys have a fabulous rest of your day. Bye!